They called it the Railroad Through Hell. The numbers explain why. Between 1904 and 1914, roughly 4,000 men died building a railroad through 48 miles of Panamanian jungle and swamp. Not building the Panama Canal itself, though that project killed thousands more, but building the railroad that made the canal possible. A construction railroad that hauled equipment, moved workers, transported excavated earth, and kept supplies flowing to the most ambitious engineering project in American history. The death rate was so high that company officials stopped publishing casualty figures after the first year. Local hospitals ran out of burial space. The railroad became infamous as the deadliest construction project per mile ever undertaken in the Western Hemisphere. The Panama Railroad wasn't new in 1904. The original line had been completed in 1855, built during the California Gold Rush to transport prospectors across the isthmus faster than the overland route. That first construction killed an estimated 6,000 to 12,000 workers from yellow fever, malaria, cholera, and accidents. The railroad operated profitably for decades, charging premium rates because it was the only efficient trans-isthmian route. Then the French attempted to build a canal in the 1880s, failed catastrophically with 22,000 dead, and abandoned the project. Yet when the United States acquired the canal rights in 1903, the old railroad was still there. Barely functional, badly maintained, completely inadequate for the massive construction project ahead. The American canal effort required rebuilding the railroad entirely, not just repairs or upgrades, complete reconstruction. The new railroad needed to handle unprecedented loads, massive steam shovels weighing hundreds of tons, trainloads of dynamite, construction equipment, food and supplies for tens of thousands of workers, and most critically, millions of cubic yards of excavated earth that had to be transported from the canal cuts to disposal sites miles away. The old narrow-gauge track couldn't handle it. The old roadbed followed the easiest route through jungle, which meant it went exactly where the new canal needed to be dug. The entire railroad had to be relocated, rebuilt to standard gauge, and engineered to modern specifications while simultaneously supporting active canal construction. Chief Engineer John Stevens recognized the railroad problem immediately when he arrived in 1905. The canal excavation couldn't proceed efficiently without reliable rail transportation. Steam shovels couldn't operate if trains couldn't remove the dirt they dug. Workers couldn't stay if supplies didn't reach work camps. The whole project depended on moving massive quantities of material quickly and reliably. Stevens made a controversial decision that shocked his supervisors: halt major canal excavation for nearly a year while the railroad was rebuilt and expanded. Critics called it waste, delay, bureaucratic timidity. Stevens insisted the railroad had to work perfectly before serious excavation began, or the canal would fail like the French attempt. The railroad reconstruction started with the route. Engineers surveyed new alignments that would keep the railroad operational while canal excavation proceeded below. This meant building temporary tracks, then permanent tracks, then abandoning temporary tracks as excavation reached them, then building new temporary tracks to replace the ones just abandoned. At any given time, there were multiple versions of the railroad in various stages of construction, operation, and abandonment. The logistical complexity was staggering. The terrain made everything harder. But Panamanian jungle isn't just hot and humid, it's actively hostile to construction. Rainfall exceeds 100 inches annually in some areas. The wet season turns unpaved ground into liquid mud several feet deep. Vegetation grows so rapidly that cleared land becomes impassable within weeks without constant maintenance. The original 1855 railroad had dealt with this by building on the easiest ground available. The 1904 reconstruction couldn't choose easy ground. The railroad had to go where the canal required it, regardless of terrain difficulty. These swamps presented the worst challenges. Large sections of the proposed canal route crossed swampy lowlands where solid ground simply didn't exist. The old railroad had avoided these areas. The new railroad had to cross them while carrying unprecedented loads. Standard railroad construction techniques didn't work. Crews would build roadbed, lay track, run test trains, and watch everything sink into the swamp. They tried timber pilings driven to bedrock. The pilings rotted or shifted. They tried rock fill, and the rock disappeared into mud. They tried concrete pilings. The concrete cracked under train weight. Eventually, engineers developed a floating roadbed system where the railroad essentially rode on a mat of interlocking timbers and rock that distributed weight across the swamp surface. It worked, barely, requiring constant maintenance and periodic reconstruction. The workers who built this railroad came from everywhere. The United States couldn't recruit enough American workers willing to endure Panamanian conditions. So the project hired internationally. West Indian laborers, mostly from Barbados and Jamaica, provided the bulk of the workforce. European workers came for premium wages. Asian workers arrived through labor contracts. The workforce constantly turned over as men quit, died, or were invalided home. Company records show that for every worker on the job at any given time, roughly 3 more had already come and gone. Turnover exceeded 200% annually in some categories. The difficulty of keeping experienced crews meant that construction quality varied wildly depending on who happened to be working that particular section. Disease killed more men than accidents, though accidents killed plenty. Yellow fever and malaria were the primary killers in the early years, transmitted by mosquitoes that bred prolifically in standing water created by construction. Dr. William Gorgas, the chief sanitation officer, understood the mosquito connection and implemented aggressive control measures, draining standing water, screening living quarters, treating patients with quinine. His methods worked eventually, reducing disease deaths dramatically by 1906. But dramatically reduced still meant dozens dying weekly. Malaria never disappeared entirely. Workers still contracted it, suffered recurring fevers, lost work capacity, and sometimes died despite treatment. Accidents killed in diverse ways. Construction trains derailed regularly on hastily built temporary track. Workers fell from moving equipment. Steam shovels toppled. Dynamite exploded prematurely. Cave-ins buried crews. Heat exhaustion struck men working in direct sun with inadequate water. Infected wounds turned fatal before antibiotics existed. The railroad hospital at Ancon treated a constant stream of casualties. Company doctors became expert at amputations, setting compound fractures, and filling out death certificates. But the cemetery at Corozal expanded continuously, adding rows of white crosses marking workers who never left Panama. The dirt trains became the railroad's signature operation. Massive steam shovels excavated the canal cuts. Primarily the Culebra Cut, the 9-mile section through the Continental Divide that required removing over 100 million cubic yards of earth and rock. The shovels loaded dirt into specialized dump cars designed to unload quickly. Trains hauled these loads to disposal sites, dumped them, and returned for more loads. The cycle repeated hundreds of times daily. At peak operation, dirt trains ran every few minutes around the clock. The railroad became an enormous conveyor belt moving earth from where it was to where it wasn't. This required precision scheduling. If dirt trains didn't arrive on schedule, steam shovels sat idle. If they arrived too frequently, they backed up, waiting for shovels to fill them. The railroad dispatchers developed complex choreography, coordinating dozens of trains, multiple shovels, and various disposal sites. They used telephone and telegraph systems purpose-built for railroad operations. Crews learned to operate on tight schedules in difficult conditions. The system worked, mostly, though breakdowns and delays occurred constantly. When the railroad failed, canal construction stopped. The engineering challenges escalated as canal excavation deepened. The railroad initially ran along the canal edges at ground level. As excavation progressed, the canal cut dropped below the railroad, it creating increasingly steep walls. Eventually, the walls became unstable. Landslides became catastrophic events, burying track, derailing trains, and sometimes killing crews. The Culebra Cut experienced massive slides that dumped millions of cubic yards of earth back into the excavation, undoing months of work. The railroad had to be relocated repeatedly to avoid slide zones, sometimes multiple times in the same area as successive slides expanded the danger zone. By 1914, when the canal opened, the Panama Railroad bore little resemblance to the 1855 original or even the 1904 starting point. It had been rebuilt, relocated, expanded, and modified continuously for 10 years. The final configuration included multiple parallel tracks in critical areas, extensive switching yards, specialized equipment maintenance facilities, and infrastructure for handling the massive traffic volume. The investment in railroad reconstruction exceeded initial estimates by factors of 2 or 3. Yet critics questioned whether the expense was justified. Engineers pointed out that without the railroad, the canal couldn't have been built at all. The human cost remains disputed. Official casualty figures list approximately 5,600 deaths for the entire canal project from 1904 to 1914. This includes canal workers, railroad workers, and support personnel. Disease claimed roughly 60%, accidents 40%. But these official numbers are almost certainly undercounted. Many workers died before reaching hospitals. Deaths among workers who quit and returned home weren't always recorded. The West Indian laborers, who provided the majority of the workforce and suffered the highest casualty rates, were poorly documented compared to American employees. Historical consensus suggests the actual death toll exceeded 10,000 for the canal project overall, with perhaps 4,000 directly attributable to railroad construction and operation. The railroad through hell earned its name. As the 48 miles of track cost more lives per mile than any comparable project in American history. But without it, the Panama Canal doesn't exist. The canal's strategic and economic impact, connecting the Atlantic and Pacific, enabling global trade, projecting American naval power, depended entirely on a railroad that could move earth in quantities no one had attempted before. 4,000 men died making that possible. Their graves line the railroad route they built through jungle and swamp. If the canal still operates, the railroad still runs, carrying freight and passengers across the isthmus. The crosses in Corozal Cemetery remain.